Hello, everyone. I'm Sam Eckmann of Gold Derby here with the editor of Avatar: The Way of Water, Stephen Rivkin. And I have to congratulate you, Stephen, on your recent Critics' Choice nomination. I imagine what does it feel like coming off of such a really long production period? This took, years of your life, I think. So what does it feel like to feel it received warmly?
Well, it's wonderful, but I have to correct you. First of all, I'm not the editor. I'm part of a team of editors
Yes, one of them.
that worked on this film for many years, included myself, uh, John Refoua, who was with me on Avatar 1, and Jim Cameron, who was an editor on Avatar 1, and David Brenner, who we lost last February, and it's one of the things I have to say. I'm very sorry to see that he didn't live to see all of this wonderful work come to fruition on the big screen.
Yeah, yeah.
But
It's
thank you
really
for the congratulations. We also had a couple of additional editors, Jason Gaudio and Ian Silverstein, and it was an army of assistants, probably one of the largest editorial staffs in history.
wow. Well, it seems like it would need it for a project this large, I would say. I was really struck when I watched it. There's two different elements I wanted to talk to you about that I thought the editing really helps pull off in a great way. One of them is this tension, because I think there's some of Cameron's biggest action sequences that he's ever done in this film. So when you think about those, like the final battle, the shark attack moment, what is the key to you in terms of building tension?
Well, it's really it's the action, but it also comes down to the actors' performances all the time, and intercutting, cross-cutting. These are all techniques that are used, like in the final battle. Obviously, there's a lot of intercutting, a lot of stories being told at the same time. Um, in the Akula attack, that's just that is a pure person against a creature kind of escape scene, and it does have a lot of tension because of the danger that's established by this creature and its jaws, snapping at coral and ripping things apart. I mean, it's Jim was very, very meticulous about wanting to show the detail of the destruction of the coral that Loak's character was trying to go deeper and deeper and escape this creature.
Mm. As you're cutting a scene like that, does it ever do you ever have to bring in fresh eyes with you because you've been looking at it so long that you need another pair there to see, is this
Oh,
actually coming out?
it's always helpful to have other people look at your work, and we do that quite a lot. We share our work with the other editors, with the assistants, and of course, Jim is the final barrier. It has to work for him, and he does his own pass on the edit as well to do final director's tweaks and editing.
Yeah. Well, the second element that really struck me is just kind of this sense of awe and beauty that the movie captures. I think beauty for the natural world, which is sort of the flip side. Often tension gives way to this gorgeous vista, or when you're on the back of a banshee with the character flying around Pandora. What goes into moments like that? How do you find that sense?
Well, what's interesting is that when we start working on a scene, it is a bare bones actor's performance in a capture suit, and there's a little bit to indicate what the landscape will be, but we're focused on editing the performances themselves. So keep in mind, this film is edited multiple times. So, but the first stage is to edit the raw performances, and we go through a very painstaking process of review, looking at all the capture, and many times there'll be actors that have combined takes. You know, the first part of the scene is one take, this section is another take, and we stitch them together. And sometimes we'll combine them with other actors, not necessarily from the same take, but from another take. So we create and get Jim to sign off on the performance edit first. And you don't have those awe-inspired vistas and incredible thing. We don't see that for sometimes years. So we have to work with a film that is just a raw performance and an indication of the landscape. And we use what we call a template. So there'll be a representation of what it might look like, but in no way the amount of detail and render quality that exists in a final. So the whole film is put together first in this form. It's like a blueprint, and then the live action characters are captured and created in this digital form first to create a roadmap for shooting the live action sections. So it's a very long process. And then when cameras are, we call them cameras, when the virtual cameras, after these very carefully selected performances are chosen and built, they're built into files, and the landscapes in a sort of proxy form, and the creatures and characters in CG in their virtual component are all photographed in the shots that will actually make up the film, and then the film's edited again. So it's a very long process. Once we sign off on those scenes, they go to Weta Effects, and they begin this long render process where every nuance and detail of a performance is reproduced on these characters. So when you talk about the awe-inspired vistas, well, we don't see that for a very, very long time. We do see a virtual camera that represents that, but not in the detail that you're seeing on the screen for the final.
Wow. So would you say then, are there scenes where you had to make a decision early on about the flow of a scene, and then you get the visuals and suddenly it has to change, or it's a big 180?
Well, I don't think I would say 180. I think that there are considerations. Yes, in the virtual camera stage where we create and the edit of the shots that will be turned over for each scene, you see all that. It's in a lower res quality, and you see the characters, you see the environment, you see all the props and creatures, but they're just not fully realized. So it is a guide, and we have to commit to these shots at the length that they are. And of course we can revisit if something turns out to be, oh my God, we need to hold on this shot another second, or we need this, or we need that. We can make revisions, but it has to start somewhere, you know. So when the scenes are turned over to Weta, they are pretty much locked. And then we go through this process of shots coming back, reviewed, and Jim will make adjustments, and then the scenes are final, you know. So but it's a very long process of review and tweaking and adding the detail and the reality of water, of smoke, of you name it. So it is probably, I would say safely, the most complicated way that you could ever make a movie. How about
It sounds it.
Yeah,
Well,
right.
that's why maybe you need such a large editing team. How do you sort of, when you have a team, there were 4 of you as the main editors, how do you delineate the work, and how do you get on the same page when you have a big team like that?
Well, I think the work gets divided up because it's so labor intensive that you have to stay with a scene and through various stages. And sometimes we'd hand off scenes, like if we were unable to complete something or we needed help with something, we'd hand it off but to another editor. But and a lot of times we would all contribute to a particular scene in one way or another at one phase or another. But I think by necessity, we had to focus on, leapfrogging, seeing whatever scenes are being worked on at the time, because you just have to do so much work on it.
You mentioned before about, the first edit sort of is just the raw footage with the actors there without visual effects. And I'm always so intrigued with editors about your ability to really shape an actor's performance based on what take you're using for what lines. So when you're editing this, I feel like there's an added complication because you're not actually seeing the Na'vi character yet. So what do you look for in those scenes when you're piecing together a performance?
Well, I think, we get enough of, we at least have one camera during the capture process that shows the virtual characters in their environment. And as I said, they're not fully realized, but it is an indication. And when we do these performance edits, we pepper those shots in to remind us where we are, what time of day it is, what the landscape looks like, what the environment looks like. And a lot of times we'll pepper a picture-in-picture windows of their faces or we'll try to cut it more like a conventional scene where you'll cut to one character, you'll cut to the other for lines and things like that. But it's purely about performance. And this is the essence of any film, any scene, is about performance and story. So we look at those performances and we see their eyes, we see their faces. It's funny, somebody asked, well, what is one of the biggest things that surprise you about it when it's done? Well, sometimes months, even years later, we get those shots back fully realized, fully rendered, and the actor's performance that you saw years before, that you made those choices on, is now in full view and in all its glory.
That's
and
pretty amazing.
You see their eyes again, you look into their pupils, you see every movement, every nuance of their face, their facial performance. And it's really quite thrilling to come full circle and see that original performance that you put together come back in the virtual character.
Yeah. Is there any particular scene that took the longest? What was like the most difficult scene to nail down in the edit?
Well, I'd say that, the finale of the film with all of the various stories cross-cut,
A lot
and
going on.
The difficulty factor there was, at the highest level. But I will say that the other aspect of this film that made it quite challenging was the amount of live action that was integrated into virtual shots. And I mentioned this before, but we actually had to capture all, like in a virtual scene, if there's a main character, Spider, who's in a lot of these scenes, and we actually captured him into the scene with the CG characters, and we had a placeholder for him. Of course, he aged a few years in the process, so by the time we shot the live action, his voice had changed, he was bigger, but we anticipated that, or Jim anticipated that. So, we'd have these scenes with the virtual Spider in it, every shot that he was in, and then that became the blueprint for actually going back and shooting his live action elements. There were some scenes that were where the CG characters were put into a live action shot, but most of the time we're talking about virtual shots where we create this template of a CG character and then have to go back and use motion control or create new shots that the live action character would fit into based on our original virtual cut. That sounds complicated, right? So it is.
It is, and especially, you know, you've worked in visual effects heavy movies before, but this everything sounds like to the next level. And one of those movies was Avatar, the first film in the series. Was there anything that you were able to take from that first movie, some lesson, and apply it here to make it a little bit maybe easier for yourself?
Well, lots. You know, I mean, the common denominator is the working with the performance edits, because that remained the same in terms of looking at the performance dailies, finding the best takes, combining takes, stitching takes, doing all the things in preparation for virtual photography. That remained the same. The live action element, you know, compounded that process. The underwater capture, which is, as far as I know, nothing like that had ever been done, added a whole new element of challenge. It was extraordinary to we took what we learned on Avatar 1 as much as we could and applied it to this, and then it went, you know, 10 more levels deep.
Yes, it certainly did. I think the results speak for themselves there for all of your work. Well, Stephen, thank you so much for chatting with me. It was great to talk to you about Avatar. Everyone who's watching, make sure you subscribe to Gold Derby and keep in touch with us throughout the rest of the season. Thanks, Stephen.
Thanks so much. Very nice to meet you. Thanks for having me.